Have you ever stood in front of a mirror and wondered, why do some women seem to move through life with a quiet radiance, as if they carry a secret strength the world cannot take from them? Their eyes shine even in struggle. Their presence feels grounded, unshakable, while others, despite every effort, feel like they're gasping for air beneath roles, expectations, and the endless chase for validation. What if that secret strength wasn't something you had to earn, but something you had simply forgotten? Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the Psyphos Depth channel and join a growing community of seekers, where we dive into psychological truths, emotional healing, and spiritual growth. If you're watching right now, drop a comment below. Tell us where you're from and what brought you here. You never know who else might feel seen because of your words. Now let's begin. In a world obsessed with image, performance, and perfection, the most revolutionary thing a woman can do is turn inward. Not to escape, but to remember. Because the most magnetic women you've ever met, the ones who don't need to impress, aren't living according to anyone's rules but their own. And that's not rebellion. It's awakening. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." That's not just poetic, it's instruction. Because from the moment a girl is old enough to speak, she's taught, often without words, how to shrink. Be good, be agreeable, smile even when you're hurting. Say yes when everything inside you screams no. Over time, she becomes fluent in a language that isn't her own. She learns the art of quiet compliance. She puts on the mask Jung called the persona, the carefully curated version of herself crafted to be loved, accepted, praised. And she wears it so well, she forgets it's a mask. But the body remembers. The soul remembers. And no matter how much success she stacks, how many people call her admirable, there's that moment late at night, staring at the ceiling, when she whispers, "Why do I still feel so empty?" Because she's been living outside of herself. The confident, joyful woman is not someone who's found the perfect routine or read the right book. She's someone who has stopped performing for the world and started listening to the quiet ache inside her bones, to the anger she was told was too much, to the softness she buried to survive. She's someone who went inward, into the mess, the shadow, the forgotten places, and made a home there. The shadow, as Jung describes, is not evil. It's not something to fear or fix. It's the part of you that you had to exile to be accepted. Your rage, your wildness, your hunger for freedom, the little girl who wanted to say no but didn't, the woman who wants to scream but smiles instead. And here's the truth no one teaches us. That shadow is sacred. Because buried inside those disowned emotions is your life force, your real voice, your power. Not the kind that dominates, but the kind that refuses to shrink. Imagine a woman who envies a co-worker's success. She tells herself it's petty. She pushes it down, acts polite, performs kindness. But deep down, she suffers. Not because envy is wrong, but because she never asked what that envy was trying to say. What if it was a whisper from her soul, a call to rise, a signal that she's meant for more, that she's tired of playing small? Integration begins the moment she stops judging that feeling and starts listening. She realizes the feeling wasn't the problem. The silence around it was. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." How many women look at their patterns and wonder, why do I always end up with people who drain me? Why can't I say no? Why do I feel like I'm living a life someone else designed? These are not signs of weakness. They're clues. The same way a wound bleeds to demand attention, the soul sends discomfort as a signal. You've forgotten something important. Come home. So instead of another to-do list or affirmation taped to the mirror, what if the path began with honesty? Not the kind of honesty that sounds good in a journal, but the terrifying kind. The kind that says, I'm exhausted. I've been pretending. I want something more. And instead of silencing that voice, you let it speak. This is the moment the journey begins. Not through discipline, but through daring. Not with answers, but with questions that crack open the surface and reveal what you buried to be loved. You start to notice it in small ways. You pause instead of pleasing. You feel instead of performing. You stop apologizing for being sensitive, tired, angry, or different. And one day, seemingly out of nowhere, you do something that surprises even you. You say no without guilt. You speak without softening your truth. You stand still in your body without needing to be prettier, quieter, more acceptable. You are not becoming someone else. You are returning. The most radiant women in the room are rarely the loudest. They are the ones who have come home to themselves. And when you've made peace with the shadow, when you've integrated the messy, the hurt, the hidden, you stop chasing confidence, because you already have clarity. You're not confused anymore about what you feel, what you want, what you deserve, and that clarity, that unapologetic honesty, is what makes you magnetic. It's not found in a mirror or a resume or someone else's praise. It's found in the stillness between breaths, when you finally say to yourself, I see you, I hear you, and I won't abandon you again. That is the moment your inner life begins to lead. And from that moment forward, the world may still demand masks, but you no longer need to wear them. She begins to notice the silence, not just around her, but inside her. It no longer feels like absence, but presence. A new kind of space, not filled with tasks or noise or obligation, but with breath, with awareness, with herself. This is when a woman touches the feminine within her, not the version distorted by culture or marketing, but the raw, intuitive, ancient energy that has always lived beneath the surface. It's not something to be added. It was never gone. It was only covered. Imagine a small child, barefoot, wild-haired, spinning in circles in the rain, laughing just because. That child still exists, and if you close your eyes and listen hard enough, you'll hear her calling, not with demands, but with longing, not for a toy or a treat, but for you, for your attention, your presence, your return. Jung spoke of this energy as the Anima, the feminine soul, fluid, receptive, radiant. It's not a gendered concept, but a spiritual force. And for most women, it was silenced early, called irrational, too emotional, too sensitive, too much. But you were never too much. You were just too free for a world that feared wildness, so you dimmed. You learned to tuck yourself in, to perform strength, to ration softness like it was a luxury instead of a birthright. And what did that cost you? So many women today are high-functioning ghosts, achieving everything on paper but feeling nothing inside. Every win followed by a quiet ache. Is this all? That ache is not failure. It's guidance. It's your feminine whispering, "Come back to me." To return doesn't require effort, only permission, a softening, a pause. You don't need to do anything to awaken this energy. You need only stop fighting it. Start with sensation. The warmth of your hands, the rhythm of your breath, the place in your chest that tightens when you're about to say yes out of habit. These are not trivial. They are invitations. You begin to realize how much of your life was spent in resistance, against emotion, against stillness, against your own intuition. Because somewhere along the way, you were told the feminine was chaos, and you believed that safety meant staying in control. But control is not the same as peace. Real peace comes when you let yourself feel fully, without labels, without fear. It's when you cry without asking permission, when you desire without shame, when you allow your body to take up space without negotiating with the mirror. And most of all, when you allow your intuition to speak and you listen. Not everyone will understand. Some will call you reckless, too dreamy, selfish. But they are not your compass. Your compass has always lived in your belly, in your chest, in the goosebumps on your arms when something just feels right. Jung believed that the feminine speaks through the unconscious, through dreams, symbols, instincts. That's why it doesn't make sense on paper. It's not supposed to. It's supposed to feel true, not look right. You start to notice the moments you've betrayed yourself in the past. The date you said yes to even though your stomach clenched. The friendship you kept because you feared loneliness more than disconnection. The job you stayed in because security felt safer than aliveness. And with each realization, you don't hate yourself. You hold yourself. You understand now. You did what you had to do to survive. But you don't have to live that way anymore. The more you trust this energy, the more alive you feel. You start to laugh, not for anyone else, but because something in you is being released. You move your body not to burn calories, but to remember that it's yours. You rest, not because you're exhausted, but because you deserve to feel whole even when you're still. And slowly, the world starts to reflect this back. You attract differently. You speak differently. You're no longer looking for someone to choose you. You've already chosen yourself. This doesn't make you arrogant. It makes you available to real love, real connection, real purpose. Because when a woman reclaims her feminine, she becomes a force. Not a hurricane, but a current. A river that no longer asks for permission to flow. And that river runs through everything. Your decisions, your relationships, your creativity. It's not about being soft or nurturing in the traditional sense. It's about being true, in your pace, in your knowing, in your being. There will be moments of fear. The feminine doesn't promise ease, it promises depth. Sometimes that depth will feel like too much. You'll want to retreat to the surface, to the neatness of plans and routines and labels. But then something unexpected happens. You no longer find safety in the shallow. You've tasted something real, something holy, and you can't go back. This is not a story of transformation. It's a story of return, a homecoming, a woman meeting herself again. And when that happens, she doesn't need to prove anything. She doesn't need to be louder or better or more desirable. She is. That's all. And that is enough. The deeper she journeys, the more she feels the tension between who she was and who she's becoming. It's not always graceful. In fact, it often feels like being pulled in opposite directions, like standing barefoot at the edge of a cliff, wind tugging at your clothes, and something inside whispering, jump, but not to fall, to fly. This is the threshold of individuation, a concept Carl Jung held as the cornerstone of human development. Not to become perfect, not to become good, but to become whole. You see, the world teaches women how to build identities, roles to play, boxes to fit, scripts to follow. Daughter, wife, leader, caregiver, good girl, good enough. But these are not selves. They are shells. and for a while they might feel safe, even celebrated, until one day they don't. That's when the awakening begins. It's subtle at first, a heaviness in your chest when you smile too much, a pang of restlessness in a life that seems perfect. You begin to hear your own voice, quiet but insistent, asking, "What if I'm not who I've been pretending to be?" Individuation is not self-improvement. It is self-recovery. It is shedding the borrowed stories, the inherited pain, the shoulds and musts that have become armor so thick you can no longer feel the skin beneath. It is asking the radical question, what if I stopped trying to be good and started trying to be real? And it is terrifying, because realness means exposure. It means risking disapproval. It means standing alone sometimes, without applause. But it also means breathing without restriction. Carl Jung described this process not as ascending into some higher self, but descending into the roots, into the shadow, into the very marrow of what makes you you. It's messy, it's holy, and it is the only way to feel alive again. Women on this path often describe a kind of cracking open, where the old self begins to peel away, and for a time, nothing feels solid. You don't recognize your thoughts. Your desires shift. Your relationships tremble. You are not who you were, but you're not yet who you're becoming. This is the cocoon phase, the in-between, the death before rebirth, and it is sacred. Do not rush it. Do not numb it. Do not call it brokenness. It is the labor of your true self being born. You might cry more during this time. You might feel lonelier. You might be misunderstood. But this is the path of fire that forges a woman who cannot be manipulated, tamed, or bought. One woman said, "When I stopped being the peacekeeper in my family, when I stopped saying yes to things that made me feel small, people told me I'd changed. But the truth is, I'd finally arrived." That is individuation. You're not building a better mask. You're taking it off. And yes, people will resist. Because when you stop performing the role they loved, they'll grieve the version of you they could control. They might call you distant, difficult, selfish. But that's not your truth. That's their discomfort with your authenticity. You are not here to be palatable. You are here to be whole. Jung taught that wholeness comes from integrating opposites, the strong and the soft, the light and the dark, the laughter and the grief, the dreams and the doubts. Not choosing between them, but honoring them all. You stop needing to be one thing. You allow yourself to be complex. You begin to redefine strength, not as stoicism, but as vulnerability that doesn't collapse. You redefine success, not as approval, but as alignment. You redefine beauty, not as adornment, but as embodiment. Every day you make small but seismic choices, to pause before reacting, to walk away when peace is priced too high, to speak up even when your voice trembles. And slowly, the ground beneath you begins to feel solid again. Not because the world has changed, but because you have changed your center of gravity from outer validation to inner truth. You begin to ask different questions. Not what should I do, but what feels like integrity. Not will they like me, but do I like myself when I'm with them? And that shift is everything. Because from that point on, your life stops being a performance and starts being a prayer. A quiet, courageous expression of who you are. Moment by moment, without needing to be understood to exist. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But he didn't say it would be easy. This path asks for your honesty, your solitude, your willingness to be seen in your raw, unfinished form. And what you get in return is liberation. Not the loud, performative kind, but the soft, sturdy kind that lets you exhale for the first time in years. You no longer need to convince anyone of your worth. You no longer barter pieces of yourself for belonging. You no longer mistake roles for identity. You're not trying to be everything. You're finally being yourself. And in that, you discover a truth that no one can take from you. That you are enough, not as a concept, not as a mantra, but as a felt, lived reality in your bones. That truth is the foundation you build your new life upon. A life not borrowed, a life not performed, a life not dictated by others, but one that is undeniably, unapologetically yours. There's a moment in this journey where she stops explaining herself. Not because she's angry, not because she's given up on being understood, but because she no longer needs to be. The weight of justifying her desires, her boundaries, her softness, her fierceness, it falls away. She's no longer trying to be someone else's idea of a woman. She's finally becoming her own. This is where true strength begins to reveal itself. Not the kind that looks impressive from the outside, but the kind that allows you to sit quietly in a storm and not betray yourself. Too often, women are taught that strength means keeping it together, that crying is a crack, that asking for help is weakness, that rest is laziness. But what if strength has nothing to do with how much you carry, and everything to do with how deeply you honor what you feel? Carl Jung called this process integration, bringing all parts of the self, even the ones we were taught to exile, into the circle of acceptance. Because you cannot hate parts of yourself into healing. You cannot become whole by cutting away what is inconvenient or uncomfortable. A strong woman is not one who hides her shadow. She's one who sat with it long enough to understand its language, who knows that every rage has a root, every ache holds a message, every fear once kept her alive. She no longer sees her past as baggage. She sees it as origin. She no longer sees emotion as a liability. She sees it as a compass. She no longer resents her body. She learns to listen to it. And that body, oh, how long it's waited to be trusted again. For years, maybe decades, it was treated like a battlefield. Controlled, corrected, criticized, starved into thinness, worked into exhaustion, shaped to fit a mold, but never heard. Now, she begins to ask, what if my body is not a problem to solve, but a partner to walk with? She stops forcing herself into routines that feel like punishment. She moves for pleasure. She eats to feel alive. She rests without guilt. She places her hand over her heart and says, "You're safe with me now." And something magical happens. The body softens, not just in shape, but in memory. The tension begins to unravel, the armor begins to melt, because it's no longer bracing for criticism, it's being met with care. This is not vanity, this is reverence. When a woman truly inhabits her body, she stops performing for the gaze of others. She dresses not to impress, but to express. She walks differently. She claims space, not as a demand, but as a declaration. I belong here, in this skin, in this life. She does not need approval. She does not ask for permission. She no longer waits for someone to tell her she's enough. She knows, and that knowing radiates from her. It's not loud. It doesn't need to be. It's the kind of quiet that shifts a room, the kind of presence that makes people turn, not because she's flashy, but because she's real. Women like this are not the product of perfect choices. They're the result of radical honesty, of sitting in rooms no one else can see, having conversations no one else will ever hear, of choosing to show up again and again, not as the person the world told them to be, but as the soul they were born with. They've learned the sacred art of saying no, not out of defiance, but out of devotion to their own energy. They've mastered the pause before the automatic yes. They've realized that boundaries are not walls, but bridges back to themselves. They've stopped chasing relationships that feel like auditions. They've stopped negotiating their worth with people who don't know how to love deeply. They've stopped watering dead plants, conversations, connections, jobs that no longer bring them to life. And the result is not isolation. It's clarity. It's freedom. It's the deep, embodied truth that says, I'd rather be alone than abandon myself again. This isn't about superiority. This is about sovereignty. When a woman owns her full humanity, her flaws, her fire, her feelings, she becomes unshakable. Not because life stops testing her, but because she no longer needs to pass the tests to feel worthy. She doesn't need to be liked to feel lovable. She doesn't need to be understood to feel whole. She doesn't need to be praised to feel valuable. She knows now that all the things she was searching for in someone else's eyes, belonging, safety, joy, peace, they were always waiting inside her. Jung said, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries." You don't get there by being right all the time. You get there by being real. You don't get there by being strong all the time. You get there by letting yourself feel, deeply, messily, unashamedly. And when you do, you begin to move differently. Not faster, not harder, but truer. You don't hustle for your worth. You create from overflow. You don't tolerate crumbs. You wait for what feeds your soul. You don't fear being too much. You learn to be exactly as you are, without shrinking, without hardening. This is the strength that lasts, the kind that doesn't crack when life gets loud, the kind that holds you in the dark and whispers, "You've got you." This is not the strength of a warrior fighting the world. This is the strength of a woman who has stopped fighting herself. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful thing of all. Somewhere along the path of this journey, something quiet and miraculous begins to happen. The need to be seen no longer feels urgent. The ache to be understood, to be validated, begins to dissolve. Not because she's hardened, but because she's softened into herself. The constant reaching, the grasping for something outside, begins to feel unnecessary. For the first time, she can just be, without explanation, without apology. And in that stillness, something unexpected emerges. Connection. Not the kind that demands, performs, or impresses, but the kind that begins with presence, with truth, with resonance. Carl Jung believed that no individual is an island, that within each of us lives a blueprint of the collective soul. So when a woman reclaims her wholeness, she's not just healing herself, she's sending out a signal, one that others can feel. It's subtle. You walk into a room and sense it. That woman over there, she doesn't need to dominate the space, but you notice her, not because she's the loudest, but because she's rooted. She doesn't need to draw attention. Her energy speaks without words. And when you lock eyes, it's like recognition. Oh, you too. This is the invisible web that binds women who are waking up. They don't always know each other's stories, but they recognize the gaze of someone who has shed the performance, who has walked through their own fire and chosen not to close again. That gaze says, "You're not crazy, you're remembering." And in a world where conformity is worshipped, That remembrance is revolutionary. These women don't compete. They reflect. They don't tear each other down. They remind each other who they are. They don't talk over each other. They hold space. Sometimes it's a moment in a coffee shop. Sometimes it's an online comment that lands like a lifeline. Sometimes it's a silent knowing, shared between strangers on parallel paths. This is feminine connection at its most sacred. It doesn't demand performance. It doesn't ask for credentials. It doesn't care about status. It's built on something deeper: truth, vulnerability, presence. One woman wrote, "When I finally found other women who didn't flinch at my softness, didn't judge my anger, didn't try to fix my grief, I exhaled in a way I didn't know I'd been holding. I laughed differently. I cried without shame. I didn't have to be strong to be loved. I just had to be real." That is the power of being seen in your entirety. And when this kind of connection happens, something shifts in your nervous system. You feel safe, finally safe, to unmask, to unfold, to rest. Because you realize you're not the only one. You never were. There are others like you, quietly unbecoming what the world demanded and returning home to themselves. And here's what's even more beautiful. When you live this way, you don't have to seek your people. You become a beacon. The more you embody your truth, the more you magnetize others who recognize it. You stop trying to fit in. You start drawing in those who see you. You stop begging to be chosen. You start becoming a sanctuary for those who are also done pretending. And that changes everything. The conversations go deeper. The laughter gets louder. The silences get more comfortable. The relationships begin to nourish rather than drain, because they're no longer built on performance. They're built on presence. Jung spoke of the resonance effect, that when one person awakens an archetype in themselves, it naturally activates it in those around them. So when you, as a woman, choose to live from your wholeness, you become a catalyst. Without even trying, you give others permission to do the same. You become a quiet revolution, not by preaching, but by being, by refusing to shrink, by embracing your contradictions, by holding space for others to be messy and beautiful and in process too. That kind of authenticity can be disorienting for those used to masks. It can be threatening to those invested in control. But to the ones who are ready, it's a lifeline, a doorway, a map. You'll notice it in their eyes. That flicker of recognition, that breath that sounds like finally. And suddenly healing doesn't feel so lonely. Because you realize this was never just your story. You were breaking a cycle that was never meant to go unbroken. You were saying no more for your mother, your grandmother, your daughter, your inner child. You were not just healing your life. You were healing a lineage. That's the power of connection rooted in awakening. It doesn't create dependency. It creates mirrors. It's not about advice or fixing. It's about presence. And in those mirrors, you begin to see yourself more clearly. The parts you forgot, the parts you hid, the parts you feared, reflected back with love, not judgment. This is how community transforms from a crowd to a circle, from noise to resonance, from obligation to devotion. A circle of women who are learning how to love themselves out loud, who are making space for others to do the same. And here's the final truth. You don't need 1,000 people to see you. You need a few who know how to stay. And most importantly, you need you. Rooted, present, breathing in your own skin, whispering, "We made it." So here you are. Not at the end, but at the most sacred threshold of all. The place where the shell is cracked, the mask has fallen, and what's left is not a version of you shaped for the world, but the truth of who you are. You don't need more fixing. You need remembering. And that remembrance, it doesn't come all at once. It arrives in fragments, in moments when you say no and your body exhales, when you cry and don't apologize, when you rest and no longer feel guilty, when you stand in your bare skin, your bare truth, and don't feel the need to cover any part of it. You remember that you are not here to be useful. You are not here to be productive. You are not here to be beautiful in someone else's eyes. You are here to be, fully, deeply, truly. Carl Jung spoke of the paradox, the truth that to fully live, you must hold contradiction. To be whole is not to be clean, but to be complete, to house both light and dark, wild and still, broken and blooming. And as you settle into this paradox, a new kind of peace begins to rise. Not the peace of quiet rooms and tidy answers, but the peace of belonging to yourself. It's not the life you were told to want. It's not the dream sold to you in magazines or movies. It's richer. It's quieter. It's real. Because this life, the one you now live, is no longer about survival. It's about sovereignty. You walk differently. Not because you've changed who you are, but because you've dropped everything that you never were. You're no longer driven by fear, no longer chasing validation like oxygen, no longer molding yourself into something acceptable. You don't need to earn rest anymore. You don't need to beg for space. You don't need to soften your power or harden your tenderness. You get to exist in the fullness of your soul, and that is more than enough. Some people will not understand. That's okay. Some will leave. Let them. The ones meant for your true self will meet you here, in the messy middle, the sacred quiet, the honest, wild center of your being. You're no longer asking, "How can I be loved?" You're asking, "What kind of love honors who I am?" You're no longer wondering, "How can I fit in?" You're wondering, "Where do I feel free?" And you realize something else. This entire journey was never about becoming someone else. It was about returning to someone you never truly left, just forgot. A woman once wrote, "All my life I was trying to be good. Then I got tired. I stopped trying to be good. I started trying to be real. And that's when everything changed." This is the transformation no one applauds at first. The one that happens in silence, in solitude, in deep personal truth. It's not flashy, it's not viral, but it's the kind of transformation that alters everything it touches. Because when a woman becomes herself, the world around her must adjust. And that's when something even deeper begins. She doesn't just inspire change, she becomes it. Not in theory, in embodiment, not in words, in presence, not in instruction, in invitation. She is no longer trying to save anyone. She is simply showing what it looks like to be free, and in doing so, she opens the door for others to walk through. The next generation sees her, the daughters, the nieces, the students, the strangers online. They see her choosing herself without apology, and something inside them whispers, "Maybe I can too." This is legacy. Not what you leave behind in trophies or titles, but what you pass on in energy. And when you reach this place, you stop fearing the crumbling of old things, jobs, identities, relationships. You no longer grip so tightly to what's falling away, because you trust what's coming. You trust yourself. You're not afraid of the dark anymore. You've lived there. You made a home there, and you brought yourself back. So now, you walk with an unshakable softness. You speak with a voice that has trembled and risen again. You meet life on your terms, not to conquer it, but to dance with it. You've remembered the truth that you don't need to be more. You need to be here, right now, in this breath, in this skin, in this sacred, unrepeatable life. And if everything else fell away, the labels, the plans, the opinions, you'd still have you. And that is everything. Thank you for being part of this journey. If something in this spoke to you, don't let it end here. Share your story in the comments. Someone out there might be waiting to hear they're not alone. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Syphos Depth. This channel is more than just videos. It's a space for healing, truth, and becoming. You belong here.